Hello, friends. There's something so interesting, albeit a bit macabre, about our fascination these days with death and murder. We see it all over television and the internet, and who in this community hasn't sat for hours and watched shows about serial killers who've never been caught and movies made about unsolved disappearances and whatnot? Seems like a bad train wreck where we know we shouldn't look, but we can't help but do it anyway. On this channel, we try to respectfully cover as many of those strange and mysterious missing person cases and murders as we can, and we try to do it in depth. Sometimes, though, there just isn't enough information for us to go fully in depth or as deep into the case as we would like to, but we still feel these people and their situations and stories should be talked about and discussed as well, lest they be forgotten. Sometimes it's not a person at all, but an entity which has some strange or bizarre mystery lurking around it, where we just can't let go and need to know more. Here's a collection of some of the most mysterious deaths or unsolved disappearances that we could find. Could you or someone you know hold the clue to unlock these mysteries? Number 1, the Mary Celeste. On December 5th, 1872, the American merchant ship named the Mary Celeste was found adrift approximately 400 miles away from the Azores Islands of Portugal, located in the eastern part of the Atlantic Ocean. A Canadian vessel came across the drifting ship, which was still at partial sail, and stopped the ship in order to investigate what the issue was. The Mary Celeste was found to be carrying a full cargo load of casks of industrial alcohol and enough food and water to last several people a few months. While the crew's belongings were all found on and around their bunks, and only one of the lifeboats was found to be missing, the ship was completely and totally devoid of people. The ship had left New York and was headed to Italy with 10 people aboard. There were 7 members of the crew, the ship's captain, his wife, and their daughter, who was only 2 years old at the time. No sight or sign of any of them was ever found. There have been theories and rumors circulating about this case since the ship was located, but never anything factual to go by. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a story about a ship called Mary Celeste, where everyone on board had been murdered by a deranged serial killer. Unfortunately, this fictitious account by a well-known author was sometimes taken to be what actually happened. The truth of the matter is, though, no one knows what fate really befell the passengers on this ship. Many researchers speculate those aboard fled for fear of the alcohol fumes leaking from the cask, causing a possible explosion. Still others say they must have fallen victim to Moroccan pirates who, for some unknown and nonsensical reason, carried off the people but none of the cargo. Before whatever fate befell these poor 10 souls who boarded that ship that fateful December day, the Mary Celeste was associated with much death and hardship, and has been subject to rumor of bad luck and even a curse. While we may never know the truth, it's said today that perhaps the crew, with a captain who was a devout Christian and never drank alcohol, clearly and loudly stated he would never abandon his ship unless it were to be for saving lives, were all abducted by some sort of extraterrestrials. It's just as good a theory as any others at this point. What do you think? Number 2, Rodney Marx. On May 12, 2000, an Australian astrophysicist named Rodney Marx was stuck in the middle of a very dark and extremely frigid Antarctic winter. He was stationed at the Munson Scott Station, which was at the time an American scientific research base located near the South Pole. There were only 49 other people there with Rodney, and they were all basically trapped there at that location until the spring. There are no winter flights to or from the South Pole because they are extremely dangerous and far too risky. These people were working and for the most part are said to have all gotten along with one another fairly well. Rodney Marx died on that 12th of May, and what happened to him and who was involved remains a mystery. Because his body had to be frozen and kept at the base until spring when flights started again, the only thing anyone knew was that he had died of some type of mysterious illness. Once his body was flown back to New Zealand and thawed out, it was discovered he had been murdered, poisoned by methanol, and all the other 49 people there with him were suspects. Rodney had most likely consumed the toxic substance without even knowing it. The authorities eventually ruled out that he had taken his own life and also thought it highly unlikely he had drunk the substance accidentally. All the others there with him for the winter were interviewed, but of course nothing ever came from any of it, and eventually foul play was ruled out as a factor in his untimely demise. The case is sometimes called the first murder committed at the South Pole, and the events that surrounded his poisoning are said to have never been determined. So, what happened to Rodney? How does someone die from methanol poisoning without being murdered, without it having been an accident, and without them having done it themselves to take their own life? This is one we also may never find the answers to. What's your opinion? Number 3, the impossible murder. In 1931 in Liverpool, there lived a lovely husband and wife named Julia and William Wallace. The couple seemed normal enough until one day in January of that same year when something happened that is so bizarre and mysterious, and which is still unsolved to this day, that has since come to be known as the impossible murder. William Wallace was an insurance salesman who had received a message one evening from someone asking him to meet them at an address on Menlove Gardens East so they could discuss policies. William was hesitant and normally wouldn't have even entertained doing business in such a way, but there was a depression at the time, and he figured he would take what he could get as far as sales. On January 21st, 1931, William left his home and headed to his appointment with the mysterious man who had requested his presence, assuming that it was a lead on a sale. William tried to find the address, but after a while of searching and some other strange circumstances, found the address he had been called to simply didn't exist, and he headed home frustrated and a bit confused. William claimed that upon returning home, he found his wife murdered, bludgeoned to death in the living room. William was eventually convicted of his wife's murder, but then it was overturned on appeal. There just wasn't enough evidence. Actually, there wasn't any evidence, not really, and the case has continued to fascinate both armchair detectives, researchers, and web sleuths alike. Historical researchers have since speculated that the murder was committed by a co-worker of Wallace's, which he had fired and accused of embezzlement from the company. In 2013, a British crime writer named P.D. James said she believes that Wallace did in fact kill his wife Julia and just happened to be helped along by a coincidental prank call to Menlove Gardens East that very same night. So what do you think? This is just a quick synopsis of this one, and there's so many mysterious twists and bizarre turns in between, it's enough to make your head spin. There are literally entire books written about this one case. Number 4, Tom Should. Australia's most mysterious death is known as the Tom Should case. This title comes from a Persian word that was printed on a small scrap of paper found in the dead man's pocket. The man was found dead on a beach south of Adelaide in December of 1948. The only things found on the body were a train ticket, a few cigarettes, a comb, and that tiny scrap of paper with the Persian word. There was no identification either. Tom Should translates to the end from Persian to English, which really wasn't a clue in and of itself. However, this piece of paper was found to be from a very rare edition of a book of poetry called The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and the last 2 words from that book are the words Tom Should. Even more mysterious, when the pathologist who performed the autopsy said that he suspected that the unnamed man had died from poisoning. Somehow, and this too, how it came about is shrouded in mystery as well. The police appealed to the public and located what seemed to be the book the scrap of paper came from, which was found on the man. Inside the book, which they came across by some unknown and unnamed means, also contained a phone number. This number led them to an Australian woman who claimed she didn't know and had never met the deceased man found on the beach, and further claimed that while she had once owned a copy of the book, she had lent it to someone. Again, no specific person was named to lead to who it was she allegedly lent the book to. There was also some handwritten code throughout the book, which seemed to be a series of letters, but the code was never cracked, and it's still unknown what it all said and meant. In 2009, an author by the name of Derek Abbott, who is also a professor at the School of Electrical and Electronic Engineering in Adelaide, came forth with a theory of his own and proposed the coded letters were traces of a manual encryption or decryption of a message using a one-time pad. This is said to be an espionage technique that can be based on text from a specific book. In this case, most likely it was from the same rare edition of the original book in question. Some people believe this gives weight to the theory that there was some sort of spy ring operating in Australia at the time, and that the Taman Shud case had something to do with that. This is another case where there are just no answers at all, and the full story is one like you'll never find again or have heard before. Who was this mysterious man? What connection did he have, if any, to the equally mysterious woman? Was he murdered, or did he take his own life? What in the world did all this have to do with that rare edition of the Book of Poetry? Sometimes cases come along where there just are no definitive answers. Usually we can live with that because when we follow the facts and evidence, it leads to some sort of reasonable conclusion. Then there are cases like the ones above, where there are not only any rational answers or any factual evidence, there are also no reasonable conclusions that can be drawn, and we are all left frustrated and scratching our heads until we move on to the next one. Well, folks, there you have it. What do you think of these strange cases? I look forward to your comments, but please keep it friendly and respectful. Until we meet again, be good to yourselves and each other. Stay safe out there. As for me, I'll see you a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.